$3,000, you could join the ranks of these people and carry the Olympic torch for 1 kilometer. You could be a part of the journey leading to here, the 1984 Los Angeles Olympic Opening Ceremonies. Would you do it? Would you pay to carry the Olympic torch? I know I would, and I probably wouldn't give much thought to the political ramifications of my actions. But selling the Olympic torch relay transformed it into a commercialized spectacle. Even as the world suffered from financial problems, Americans across the country were willing and able to pay to carry the torch for 1 kilometer. So the torch became a symbol, a propaganda show, designed to prove the superiority and stability of the American capitalistic way of life. Now, proving the superiority of the American way of life at the 1984 Olympic Games takes on particular significance when we look at the Games within their Cold War context. So I argue that the 1984 Los Angeles Olympic Opening Ceremonies show the superiority of American society in response to the 1980 Moscow Opening Ceremonies. To prove this to you today, we will begin with a discussion of the background and the historical events of the Cold War leading up to the 1980 and 1984 Olympic Games. Then we'll move into a discussion of the artistic elements of both the 1980 and 1984 Olympics and how they represent each nation's ideologies. And finally, we will look at the broader significance of the opening ceremonies and how they served the United States Cold War strategy towards the Soviet Union. So to begin, we will look at the historical background and the Cold War. Escalating tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States defined the second half of the 20th century. Poised on the brink of nuclear war, the vying superpowers fought a Cold War defined by vilification and indirect attack. So to combat the Soviet threat, the United States adhered to a policy of containment. U.S. strategy called for a long-term, patient but firm, and vigilant containment of Soviet expansive tendencies, which you can see depicted here, with Joseph Stalin extending his influence across the European continent. Now, because the United States Cold War strategy was so long-term and broad in scope, everything the United States did during the Cold War years served to deter the Soviet threat. And this included hosting the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles. Now, at the Olympic Games, the opening ceremonies offer the host nation the opportunity to present an image to the world. International sporting events are subject to external factors, such as judging, or cases when the star athlete doesn't win the Olympic gold. But within the opening ceremonies, the host nation has a unique opportunity to present a controlled image to the world. In 1980, the Soviet Union used the opening ceremonies to present an image of Soviet superiority. And in 1984, with the Olympic Games in Los Angeles, America had the opportunity to respond. So now we will look at how this response manifested itself within the opening ceremonies. We will begin with a discussion of the venues. The 1980 Moscow opening ceremonies took place in the newly constructed Lenin Stadium. In total, the Soviet Union spent $9 billion funding the Olympic Games that year. By placing the opening ceremonies in a new stadium, the Soviet Union put them in a physical manifestation of their economic vitality. The communist Soviet Union could afford to create a lavish Olympic showcase. But in 1984, the city of Los Angeles could not. Plagued by financial crisis, the Los Angeles Olympic Committee could only afford to spend 4% of Moscow's $9 billion expenditure. So they had to make use of what they had. And what they had was the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum and the American private sector. So to combat the financial crisis, the Los Angeles Olympic Committee decided to transform the Olympics from a civic enterprise into a private enterprise. If the games turned a profit, as they hoped they would, the private organizing committee would reap the benefits. But in the event of a loss, the city of Los Angeles would bear no financial liability. So the 1984 Olympic Games became intrinsically tied to the American capitalistic system. And now we can look at the decision to use the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, not as one that demonstrates the instability of the American financial system, but as one that proves the success of the American private sector, a sector non-existent in Soviet Russia. The city of Los Angeles could not afford to host the games, but the American private sector could take on an enterprise that had previously been the economic concern of governments. So the 1984 Olympic Opening Ceremonies within the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum became a showcase for illustrating free enterprise as a strategy for Olympic and by extension, national development. So from the physical space of the opening ceremonies, we will delve into an analysis of the more artistic elements. We will begin by looking at this clip from the 1980 Moscow opening ceremonies. Now I ask you to take note of the near perfect synchronization. And you also have the use of lines and collective action. And furthermore, you have the use of youth, and youth portraying their physical strength, which sends a message to the world of the future and the potential of the Soviet system. So you contrast this clip with this one from the 1984 Olympic Games in Los Angeles. Immediately, you notice there is not the same emphasis on synchronization. Everyone is going off in different directions. And there's a great sense of liberty. You also have the use of the American West, which has long been associated with the idea of the American dream, where in America, you have the opportunity to pursue your own success and your own individual goals. And the American system provides for this freedom. So now we'll move into an analysis of an aspect of the opening ceremonies that got me interested in the topic in the first place. And this is the card flipping technique that both the Soviet Union and the United States used in their opening ceremonies. We'll begin with this clip from the opening ceremonies in Moscow. So throughout the ceremonies, this card-flipping crew of soldiers raised cards above their head to display slogans and words such as, "Oh sport, you are peace," "Oh sport, you are joy," and "Oh sport, you are happiness." Once again, you notice the synchronization and the use of collective action. And you also have soldiers and soldiers working together, which sends a message of the Soviet Union's military strength. Now at Los Angeles, they used a similar card flipping technique. However, unlike the ceremonies in Moscow, the card flipping technique at the Los Angeles ceremonies was unrehearsed. It relied on the cooperation, not the compulsion of audience members. Audience members voluntarily raised the cards above their heads to display this interconnected ring of flags after being asked to over the loudspeaker. As Peter Uberoff noted, we don't have a society that allows us to tell 30,000 people to practice for 6 months. So the card flipping technique in Los Angeles sent a powerful message to the Soviet Union, one of a world in voluntary solidarity with the United States and its ideologies. This furthered the United States Cold War strategy of containment by isolating the Soviet Union on the international level. So to conclude, you can see that the 1984 Los Angeles Olympic Opening Ceremonies sent a powerful message to the Soviet Union, one of the vitality of the American capitalistic system, its sense of freedom, and its resolve in the face of a Soviet threat. And now we can look at the Los Angeles opening ceremonies as another weapon in the United States Cold War diplomatic arsenal. Thank you.